welcome to Audiolog 3, Wormholes. It was hard to pry my eyes open, like they both had a newfound weight to them. I felt as though I'd been passed out for days, and by the looks of the surroundings, it might have been a possibility. I was in a wooden room, on an old, rotted mattress. There were patches of light showing through holes in the walls, and a coat of dust sat undisturbed over the entire place. Footsteps approached slowly from down the hall. With each one, my heart sped up. The hallway was dark, and I could only make out the silhouette of a figure standing in the doorframe. Upon witnessing the silhouette, I immediately knew who stood before me, hands in his pockets, and a face cloaked in shadow. It was the man from the diner. The man who I had suspected had followed me to the excavation site. Without moving from the doorway, he spoke. He told me not to move, not to freak out, and mentioned something about being on my side. At some point, one of his statements stood out more than the rest. He'd said, "You're lucky to be alive after what you witnessed last night." Which begged the question, what exactly had I witnessed? The memory had been obscured to brief flashes of pain and torment. The only other sense I could recall was awful noises I couldn't even begin to describe. He told me I needed time to recover and motioned to my left arm. From elbow to wrist, there was a blood-soaked gauze bandage. He warned that my arm under the bandage was a disturbing sight, but he took care of it before it, quote-unquote, got serious. Unwrapping the gauze, I could feel dozens of small wound scabs pulling at it. Witnessing the wound was jarring. My upper forearm was coated in tiny, bunched-together holes. They revealed raw flesh and tendons. Before I could even begin to understand what had happened, the man with the silver hair explained. "Worms," he said in a clarifying tone, before following it up with, "They came from the spell. Henry's got them too." He pulled a small glowing jar out of his pocket and stepped into the room. He held it out to me, and even before taking it, I could determine the contents. It was filled with red and magenta bioluminescent worms, all their organs visible through semi-transparent skin. Towards their mouth, which was made of 6 mandibular teeth, there were 2 thin, fleshy legs. The worms ranged in sizes, some being short and about half a centimeter in width, others being much longer, with widths that could be measured in millimeters. The man told me that they would have spread to my eyes if he hadn't removed them. It was strange to feel gratitude toward someone who previously left me so off-put. With this in mind, I questioned him as to why he'd followed me the previous day. He told me he was interested in having an ally that shared the same goals as him. He mentioned having some sort of personal vendetta against Henry Ellis and the excavation project itself, but didn't further elaborate on specific reasons. After handing the jar of worms back to him, he told me his name. Max. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to stay much longer. I was called back to the excavation site for a specific objective that I was to perform alone. My task was to supervise Jackie, who'd been released from the hospital well enough to begin working again. Max offered to drive me to the site, to which I happily obliged, especially after realizing that the company truck I'd borrowed was still in the parking lot of the site. The house we'd been in, as I suspected, was an abandoned property, not far from the roads that led to the site, but hidden by forest. Seeing Max's car, which definitely was the car that had followed me, had been surprising at first. I almost jumped at first sight of it, but at this point I felt relatively comfortable. Besides which, getting into the car of someone who trailed me the day before was hardly the weirdest or worst thing that had happened in recent recollection. About halfway to the site, Max pulled out a cigarette and lit it, briefly taking a drag before exhaling it through his open window. After we'd arrived, he lit another one and shook my hand. He told me he'd see me around and sped off almost as soon as I shut the car door. I grabbed the walkie-talkie off my belt and asked the supervisor where Jackie was stationed. It wasn't surprising to hear they put her quite far from the hole. Almost as soon as I stepped onto the dig site, I could feel the holes in my arm pulsing in pain. As I passed the hole, they stung, and I couldn't help but instinctively hold the arm while I did. I met up with Jackie, who looked a lot better not bleeding on the floor. She greeted me and we both made small talk while climbing into a dump truck. When she shut the door, her demeanor changed. She glanced down at my forearm while starting the ignition, and in an almost whisper-like tone, she said, "You've got holes, like Ellis, but he's got them in his chest." I pressed her on what she meant, and for a moment she stayed silent. She drove the truck closer to the rest of her group, and they began loading it. She leaned back in her seat with one hand on the wheel, and without turning to look at me, she spoke again. She'd said, "I know things, Donovan. I know about what you're doing. I know about who's helping you and who's helping him. I know about the worms and the cluster. The night before Thomas fell into the hole, Henry had taken both him and me into his office for a special meeting." For a moment she paused and looked upset, reminiscing the night of January 26th. She continued, "I don't remember too much of that night, but Henry did something to both of us. It was fucked up, and I should have done something because I knew Thomas was going to die the following day. Henry kept rambling about how Tom was some sort of sacrifice. I didn't believe it. I honestly thought the small amount I could remember was some sort of dream. Or I did until the hole appeared, and it all came rushing back at once. The hospital removed the worms from my stomach, but I got them from Henry the same way you did." I interrupted Jackie to inquire about what Henry had sacrificed to Thomas, too. She lightly cleared her throat and started driving the truck, which was now full with dirt and rocks. "He never mentioned her by name, but there's definitely something down there. Something old and hungry. He told us he needed Tom to help make her body. Honestly, it gives me chills to think about what he meant." She went silent again as she emptied the truck. I broke the silence by asking how I could trust her word and how I knew she wasn't making it up. She giggled and answered, "Because you've seen it, Donovan. Because you have the holes in your skin. You've seen the worms and you've heard her song." I sighed, couldn't help but agree. I followed it up with another question. This time I asked what the song sounded like, more specifically what she'd heard. She said, It starts with a low hum, which is what you heard, and then it gets louder, till you can feel it all over. Then the song changes, because until that point she was warming up for her real voice. It's hard to describe. It's like a million violins simultaneously playing the best and worst song imaginable. It makes your skin feel cold, like there's no heat left in the world and the music suffocated you. Then it just gets louder till it's screaming through your head and you can finally understand what she's saying to you. She stopped speaking again, and so did I. Thinking about the low hum I'd heard before passing out the previous night made my wound sting, and the hairs on the back of my neck stand. I felt lucky to not have heard the full extent of whatever lay beneath the earth. Then, I thought of a question that kept the hairs standing. I asked what the hole had said to her. She gulped before answering. Her voice was muffled, and also almost too loud to hear clearly, like she was whispering in screams. She told me I needed to get stronger. She kept telling me to walk into the hole, with the promise of warmth to contrast the coldness and bearing on voice, and knowledge that could be used to speak in her tongue, to gain whatever I wanted in the universe. I thought real hard about throwing myself in. I even got up real close to the edge before Dale and Larry, my other two group members, pulled me away. As soon as they did, I couldn't comprehend her voice anymore, and the song had become so loud in my head it just sounded like ringing. That's when my ear started bleeding and your group got called up to the hole again. When Jackie stopped talking about it, I comforted her the best I could. She said knowing she wasn't crazy was comfort enough. Then, she proposed an idea. She wanted to help me with Ellis by prying information out of him. She figured that she'd be able to get the information easier since she was one of the first people given his gift of worms. Jackie was also the only person so far other than Ellis who had been fully capable of communicating with the thing in the hole. When the workday ended, Jackie and I went our separate ways. Max was waiting for me in the parking lot with a cigarette in his mouth, but had only come to give me his contact information.